welcome everyone. Hello. Welcome to our Fireside chat with Fiona McNae, hosted by the Exeter MBA as part of the Leading Edge series. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ciara Eastell and I'm a Professor of Practice here in the Centre for Leadership at the University of Exeter Business School. Welcome to all of you and to Fiona, of course, for joining us. So with our fireside chats, we really like to find out what makes different leaders tick, really. We talk to a range of leaders from a wide variety of backgrounds and get under the skin of their leadership journey. So we've got a great opportunity to hear today from Fiona. And these fireside chats too give us the space and time to think about our 3 priorities as a business school. So that's responsible leadership, environmental sustainability, and digital transformation. So welcome to all of you. We've got a really good mix today of current students, alumni, members of staff, CEOs from our local businesses and our wider stakeholders. Do feel free to turn your cameras on. We've increasingly done this in this series and it's really nice to see who's on the call today. So if you feel comfortable, do feel free to pop your cameras on. It's really nice to see you. And also pop in the chat who you are, where you come from, so we have a sense of who's on the call today. As you know, we try to make this as informal as possible. It is lunchtime, so if you're eating your sandwich, drinking your tea, that's absolutely fine. We hope you enjoy and are inspired by the conversation. So if you've joined us before, you know the format, but just a couple of words if you haven't about how it will work. So Fiona and I will speak for about 35 minutes. And then I'll ask as many questions as I can manage within the time that we've got. Don't hold back on your questions. We love to get the questions, so pop them in the chat as we go, and then I'll pick them up towards the end. We're recording the event today, so we'll make it available as we do with all of the other Leading Edge series onto our website. So there's some great videos on there, so do have a look at the Leading Edge website. So welcome, Fiona, to the Leading Edge Fireside Chat.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Really nice to have you. I'll just say a few words about your background and then we'll kick off for you. So Fiona read biochemistry at the University of Surrey, which as an arts person, I'm always very impressed with scientists. And she enjoyed it so much that she completed a PhD in molecular toxicology. She then worked for Unilever and worked for several years in research and development, engaging with the IP portfolio and developing new women's health products. She was seeking a broader commercial challenge and joined WPP marketing agency, Added Value, now Kantar, and was appointed Director of Brand Strategy, focusing on insight methodology and innovation. And during that time, completed her MBA at Henley. Fiona subsequently left Added Value and partnered with Malcolm Evans in founding Space Doctors, and she's led the growing Space Doctors team for over 20 years, developing from a 2-person specialist semiotics business into a thought-leading international brand consultancy, specialising in using cultural and semiotic insight to create meaningful futures for brands and organisations. Just last year, Space Doctors joined forces with InSites Consulting, a global agency focusing on creating sustainable brands for the future. And Fiona is now a managing partner of InSites Consulting, responsible for leading the global brand transformation division. Fiona brings a synthesis of scientific, commercial and creative skills to her team's work with international client teams to solve challenging business issues and to make brands more effective, imaginative and impactful. And in her spare time, I don't know when she has any, but in her spare time, Fiona sings with Brighton Festival Chorus and Youth Choir and acts as a trustee to both. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that today. She's mum to 2 grown-up children, 5 grown-up stepchildren, and she says a not very grown-up dog called Bob. So thanks again, Fi, for joining us. Welcome to Leading Edge. Just tell us where in the world you are today.
So I'm sitting in my shed at the end of my garden in Brighton, south coast, not far from the sea.
Lovely. Very nice. So just before we delve into kind of your leadership journey over the years, can you just tell us a bit more, Fi, about your current role with InSites Consulting? What kind of company is it and what do you do?
Yeah. So InSites Consulting is a global, and by global I mean sort of 18, it has 18 local offices. And we do various sorts of market research, most of which is platform enabled, technology enabled. So market research has been through a big digital transformation in the last 10 years or so. So qualitative mostly, tech-enabled market research, and from that we build innovation strategies and brand strategies for all sorts of people around the world. So that's InSites Consulting, and then my company, Space Doctors, joined forces with them at the back end of last year, and we bring a particular specialism to that organization. So instead of doing consumer research, or human research as I like to call it, people aren't units of consumption, we bring cultural understanding. So our specialism is in cultural insight and semiotics, which is really a discipline which helps you understand how meaning is constructed in various cultures around the world.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really helpful. I'm sure we're going to come back to that later. That's great to know more about that. So let's go back then to the beginning of your career, perhaps even before your career. Can you just tell us about what you were like as a young person, Fee, and whether the leadership that you've demonstrated subsequently was in kind of abundant evidence as you were growing up?
Gosh, you'd have to ask my parents what I was like as a young child. But I always remember being enthused by the world. I always remember being interested and enthused in everything that was going on, and very desperate to become an adult. Really, really wanted to work out what being an adult would be like in this world, and what kind of, the world felt like a big playground to me. It felt like there was all sorts of opportunity out there, and I wanted to go and just kind of explore. I wasn't the sort of person who had a sense of a particular vocation, or a sense of, you know, this is the direction I'm going to head in. I remember one of my teachers at school said, "You're not supposed to know. It's like giving a child, you know, 9 paper bags and saying, choose which sweet you would like. And of course you don't know until you open the paper bags." So it was just, I just wanted to set out on a journey and see what there was to learn and what contribution I could make. So I think I was probably a little bit overexcited as a child, a little bit overly energetic, a little bit overly enthusiastic, and keen not to cut down on the possibilities at early doors. Yeah.
And I said you sort of gave your bio at the start, and you know, you did a PhD, you know, fairly early on. And academic life wasn't for you ultimately?
Well, I loved it. I mean, I enjoyed my PhD. I enjoyed it. I had a father who was particularly keen on tertiary education, and having done my degree, kind of said, well, that's the first hurdle, well done. So there was clearly a second hurdle. So he was definitely behind the you know, my choice of doing a PhD. Our parents do influence us, don't they? So I did my PhD and I loved it. I was excited by it and interested by it, but was always most interested in how it could be applied. You know, the thinking, the science for science's sake just didn't feel like it connected with the world well enough. So I wanted to know what was next, and I wanted to know how we apply this and where we take this to, and how it makes a difference to people's lives. You know, as my mother would say, what's that got to do with the price of fish? You know, it's like what really makes this practical and tangible.
Yeah. And so you moved from that kind of finishing your PhD and went into the sort of corporate world, but you weren't you weren't there so long before setting up your own business in Space Doctors. Can you tell us a bit about, well, both how it was to be in the corporate world then, but then also what triggered you to think, actually, I'm going to set something up on my own here?
So the corporate world then, we were talking the sort of early 90s, and I enjoyed it because I enjoyed the bravery and the ambition of it. I was working in Unilever. I just finished my PhD sponsored by Unilever, so I'd moved from the R&D facility into one of the operating businesses. And I found the excitement of planning what an organization may do. I worked on a project called Foresight 2010 as part of the work that I was doing. And the excitement of being in an organization responsible for starting to think about where that could be in 5 or 10 years' time, I found really exciting and really interesting. But the thing I found baffling was that people thought it was unusual that I was a woman, and I couldn't understand why that was of any interest to anybody. And I remember being asked to join the Women in Science and Engineering network and just saying, no, why would I want to do that? Is there a men in science and engineering network? No, okay, well, I'm not going to do that then. So I found that very baffling and had to deal with quite a lot of sort of prejudice actually over those first few years. Not that it bothered me at all. I just firmly believed that if I did my job well, it would all go away and it would be fine. But I enjoyed my time in the corporate world. And I enjoyed mostly seeing the actionability of the research. So moving from research into development and sizing up new markets and understanding where we could go next as an organization. So that was great. I think I stayed too long. I think one of my learnings is you can kind of allow yourself to get comfortable in a role. And much as I wasn't there I was only there for sort of 5 years, but I should have moved on probably 18 months before I did. Because I think once you start to just find it easy, you sort of end up doing yourself a disservice and the organization a disservice. You need to be all excited and engaged by the work you're doing. So I ended up leaving on a point of principle, which was probably not the best thing ever, but I left on a sort of a moral issue, sort of walked out one day. But then joined a WPP, a branch of WPP, who are a big marketing services conglomerate, because I wanted to understand the next part in the journey, which is how do you go about stimulating demand for products? So it made sense to me that you do research and development and then product development, and then you do some strategy, and then you start to understand how to stimulate demand. And that was great because it was suddenly a really creative space. And that was extraordinarily exciting, having been in science for quite a few years. Really, really exciting to be engaging with the development of packaging and advertising and storytelling and visual identity and understanding how people feel about products and how you then articulate that through communications. So that was really thrilling for me, and I enjoyed that. But then whilst I was there, I think I was probably always looking for an opportunity to start my own business. I think probably right from the get-go, at university, I wanted to be the chairman of the Hall of Residence, and I wanted to, be the chairman of the BINSOC, as it was called, the Biochemistry Society. And I think I was sort of feeling like I wanted to start my own business, but I didn't know what to do. I sort of had an empty entrepreneurialism. I needed an idea. And it was really when I was working at WPP that I found a methodology and just thought, this is great. This is so exciting. I think I've just been led for a lot of my career by my interest. This just felt like the next really interesting thing, which was semiotics, and understanding how you go about analyzing cultural change and understanding meaning construction. And it was just the next thing that enthralled me. And an opportunity, I saw an opportunity because I was sort of looking for one. And had I not been looking for one, I wouldn't have seen it. But I saw an opportunity to start doing some consultancy. It was actually a note that came through from Procter & Gamble. We'd won an award in WPP, and a note came through from P&G saying, can you do some of that for us? And the opportunity was that the agency I worked for were a very Unilever agency, and Unilever agencies never work with Procter & Gamble and vice versa. So this was a job that couldn't be taken on through my existing agency. So I had a chat to my boss and said, I want to leave. I'm going to leave anyway. Are you comfortable if I take on this P&G project? And they said yes. And that was our first client in the company that became known as Space Doctors some 20 years ago.
Amazing. And that sort of entrepreneurial streak then, how quickly did you feel like an entrepreneur? How, moving from that kind of corporate world, how quickly did you feel, I'm running my own company here, this is my thing and I can nurture it and grow it? How did you kind of acquire the characteristics of an entrepreneurial leader quite quickly?
Yes, but probably not consciously. I mean, I just followed my interest. I followed my passion for this particular subject. I think the point where you realize you're running a business is when you realize you've got to employ somebody.
Mm.
And you sign the first contract, and then you do get a sense of the responsibility, but also you get a sense of this becomes an entity in and of itself. It becomes an entity that's not just when it's just you and you're freelancing, it's just a bank account and a name. But when you employ somebody, it becomes something that belongs to somebody else as well. So it becomes a property that's not entirely yours. And you're responsible for then nurturing and growing that through people. And I think that through people bit is something that I learned over the years, is that much as you can be fiercely passionate and maybe entrepreneurial in spirit and energized and risk-taking and every day's day zero and all this good stuff, unless you can manage that through a team of people, it'll never make the impact that you want it to make. It's about galvanizing a team, and a team that you recruit to be better than yourself, I think is a key thought. But galvanizing a team around an idea and learning from them on how they want to articulate that idea and take it to market. Unless you can do that, then you will never grow. You'll never grow a business. So that was quite a learning, actually.
And did you find the kind of that leading that team? I mean, it feels like you just took things on naturally and it just kind of things happen. But, did you find that kind of working with recruiting, working with inspiring, leading a team, just a kind of natural part of who you were, or did you have to work at that?
I think as an entrepreneur in a growing business, your role changes every day, because no day is the same. Tomorrow the business is slightly bigger, is slightly more complex than it was today. And that happens every single day. So you have to get very good at just reading where the change is coming from and trying to sort of mold the organization to whatever that new state may be. And part of that was easy. Part of that was really tough. I made bad decisions along the way. So, we recruited way too fast in London shortly before one of the big downturns, and we had to close the London office, which was, just awful. I mean, just one of the worst days of my entire life, because you feel utterly responsible. Much as you're trying to encourage people to be involved and grow the business, and, they're all part of the team. When it goes wrong, you take the responsibility as the leader. So that was a really dark day, but one that we sort of recovered from, and we managed to bring some of those folks back on a freelance basis, and we learned a lot from, mostly about recruiting ahead of the revenue curve, which is not advisable sometimes. So there have been trying moments, testing moments, and I think one of the most testing was getting to the point of understanding that I wanted to move on, and I wanted to place my business in a bigger context, to sell it to a bigger organization. And that really is a tough set of decisions, because you put your heart and soul into a business, and you want to make sure that this is a good move for everybody. So that's a real tough decision to make.
I'm going to ask you about that in a minute, but can you so you did, I mentioned at the outset that you did an MBA at Henley.
I did.
Can you just tell us, I mean, there'll be MBA alumni and students on this call. Can you tell us why you did an MBA and what it gave you in the short and long term?
Confidence, just pure confidence. It just gave me the frameworks and the context to think through stuff. If you're working as an entrepreneur leading your own business, it's a relatively lonely job a lot of the time, because much as you have a board of directors, it comes down to you. It comes down to you to make the right decisions. And having an MBA behind you just gives you that across the business, all of the functions. You've got the basics. You've got a clear fundamental understanding of how business operates. So, and you have to work like that, obviously, as an entrepreneur. You're called into, commercial contract meetings. You're trying to work out what your branding's about. You're trying to work out how to deal with an innovation funnel. You're wondering about your logistics and how the flow's working, whether your work in progress is sufficient this month, and what happened with the new maternity regulations. And, there are all these considerations that are running simultaneously. And it just gives the basis and the confidence to deal with that. And also just good mates and contacts, people that you can phone up and say, help, what happens when this happens? So maintain your network from your MBA, keep hold of that address book. That's such an important asset.
Yeah. And what about mentors as well? As we talk on the leading edge about mentors as well. Can you tell us about some of the characters in your kind of throughout your career that have provided that either formal or informal mentoring for you?
Yeah. So I think what I remember is things people said to me, individuals said to me. I mean, there were some key people, but it's also sort of moments where people have said something that have changed the course of your career. And I think if you have a conversation and somebody says something and you go away and you think about that, that's having an effect. So I remember I gave a science presentation, was very nervous about it, didn't think I was any good at it. And he said, he was a senior manager in ICI where I was working on my industrial year from university. And he said, you communicate better than most people I see. And at that point, I'd had no idea of myself as having any communication capability. I thought I was okay scientist, not as brilliant as my cousins who are brilliant scientists, but I was an okay scientist, but I didn't think of myself as a communicator, and it stuck. And you have to notice when things stick, because I'm sure millions of things were said to me that day, but that's the one thing that stuck with me. I remember being in a bar with a wonderful guy who was part of our lab. And I was asking, in my final year, I was asking whether I should do a PhD or an MBA and what he thought. And he just said, do both. Why are you limiting yourself? And that's another moment where you think, oh, that's interesting. And then, so I met a wonderful woman called Janine Hawkins, who was my CEO at Added Value, at the marketing branding agency that I was part of, who I just felt was utterly brilliant and brought me a sense of perspective that was useful. You just come across people in life who bring a challenging sense of perspective that make you think differently. And she was fantastic. So when I set up Space Doctors, I asked her to be an NED, and she's advised us throughout the whole of Space Doctors, really developing, and has been fantastic. But yeah, I think it's about, when I was thinking about this talk today, I was going back and thinking about all the sentences that people have said over the years that were pivotal, that were just a collection of words which changed my life. And the reason they changed my life, because they were attaching to something in my mind that was already there, that was just triggering some sort of response. So I think look out for those meaningful sentences that come along once in a while.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Because I'm sure you'll have found that there will have been meaningful sentences that you have said to other people. And of course, when you're saying those things, you don't often or always realize that you also are having an impact on other people. And I was just wondering whether, to what extent you see yourself as a mentoring type of leader. I mean, I'm imagining that you are, but how you've brought a kind of mentoring style to both your own team, but also to people outside of your organization. Has that been something that you've done?
I've tried to. I think as I get older, I understand more the importance of that. I think if you wound back 15 years, I would have been going too fast and in too much of a directional way to really have absorbed that. But now I've had time to understand how to grow a business through people. Mentoring is a huge part of that. And I really, what I love, I remember when I started the business thinking, I just want to create an environment where however long people come and stay for, if they stay for 2 months or 2 years or 20 years in the business, that they look back and they say, that was time well spent, in my life. That it's an environment where people grow, where they make friendships, where they learn, where they get challenged. But most importantly, it was a time that they look back at and say, that was really well spent. I'm glad I spent my time that way. And, you know, part of that is then making sure that you're putting the conditions in place to have a sort of a nurturing and developmental environment. So I think I try hard to mentor. I hope that some of the things, some of the interactions are helpful for some of the guys that are in the team. And now in my new role, it becomes even more important because it seems I'm older and more senior, so I have to do more of that.
It's that shocking thing when you realise that you've gone from being one of the youngest to being one of the
happens very quickly, yeah.
And you mentioned there a few minutes ago about you know, the joining forces with InSites Consulting and Space Doctors. You know, you having led it for 20 years, and then kind of doing the deal to join with another company. Can you say something about what the leadership experience of that felt like for you? You know, to take something that you'd nurtured and developed and find the right home for it, and how you managed through all of that. How long did it take? What did it involve? How you as a leader kind of approached all of that?
It took about 18 months from start to finish through lockdown. So we did it all remotely, which had its challenges. I guess there comes a point where, as a leader, you need to take responsibility for what happens to the organization over horizon where you know you're not going to be there any longer. So I'm, you know, coming up 55, and I know there's not going to be another 20 years of me leading Space Doctors. That's very clear. So there's a new sort of responsibility you have to take, which is to either find a way of, you know, taking your investment out of that business because it has a new investor of some description, or you have to sell the business, or you have to get to an MBO. But when you start a business in the heady days of entrepreneurialism, it's very rare that somebody says, what's your exit strategy? And I remember somebody saying to me a few years in, what is your exit strategy? And that seemed like quite an odd concept when you're in the heady youth of a new business. But of course, it's the most important thing to know. It's the most important thing to know, because really all the way through growing your business, there will come a day when you'll need to go through some sort of due diligence to pass on this business to somebody else. And at that point, you better be sure that you've filed that share certificate appropriately and that you've really kept track of good records over time, because that's where the value of the business to some degree lies. So an early understanding of your exit strategy is a really good thing. It was simultaneously the most exciting and the most gut-wrenching thing I've ever done, I think, was selling my business. Exciting because after being through many, many candidates, InSites Consulting were the business that for me presented us with the greatest opportunity to grow, both through bringing some of their digital transformation into our cultural insights techniques, but also opening up the possibility of us growing across their 18 offices around the world. So immediately being able to scale the business more internationally than we had done before, and giving the people in the business the opportunity. And it was gut-wrenching because my business was my family, and still is, actually. And so the demons in your mind about what's going to happen when you sell out your family are horrendous demons, and really hard to justify. So I sleep like a log always, apart from those 18 months, where the worry is intense and you'll really need to get it right, legally, financially, in distributing the proceeds of the sale to the people in the business, because they're the ones that grew it, and in making sure you're making the right decisions. And one of the hardest things was deciding to make that decision myself. And I can see absolutely the arguments for not doing it that way, and for, you know, making that much more of a collegiate decision. But in the end, I was 100% shareholder of that business, and I wanted to make that decision myself. And that's maybe, I don't know, is that leadership? It's one sort of leadership, I don't know. So it was tough. It was tough. And somebody said to me halfway through, it won't be as bad as you think, you know. And I thought, well, I think it will be, actually. I think it's going to be terrible. And actually, it wasn't as bad as I imagined it would be. We're still in the process of integration, which is a whole different set of, you know, business considerations around value and where does value come from and how do you integrate two quite different businesses in a way that you retain the value of the smaller organization, but you're still building synergies and integrating. That's quite a tough job. So we're right in the middle of that as we speak today. And it's a job where we have to retain autonomy in the things that we do well as a business, in our semiotic insight and our cultural insight, because that's what they bought, whilst at the same time playing nicely with the rest of the organization. So yeah, it's not an easy thing to do, to sell a business that you've built and that you've grown. It's not something I'll do again. It's great. I'm not going to do it again. And yes, I believe it was the right thing.
And did you, I mean, it sounds really full on, and to do that during lockdown and the pandemic is even more trying. Did you take advice during that? I mean, I'm imagining you did, but, you know, because those are things that you've not had to do before.
Yes, I couldn't have done it without it. So I had a network, a little ecosystem of people that were helping me out. So obviously you have your corporate solicitors and you have your, you know, financial people and whatever, but you also have an M&A broker that I chose to work with, who knew the market and knew how it worked. And alongside the professional people, I also had a coach who just helped me through the more personal and emotional side of it, and helped me think through, particularly, how do you put this to the team? How do you get this across to the team in the best possible way? And that piece of coaching was invaluable. He's somebody that I connect with once every month and have done for quite a long time. And I just think without him, I couldn't have got through those 18 months. So I think that's the other thing, as a business leader, it's quite a lonely job, and you need to have somebody to just bounce the ideas around with, to help them focus a bit on you and your head, so that you're in the right shape to take the business forward, because you can get too strung out too quickly otherwise. So yeah, Giles was utterly amazing in helping me through that time. And, you know, partner, family, people around you,
made it worthwhile. And I know I mentioned music earlier, and you're a member of the Brighton Festival Chorus, and you were at the Royal Albert Hall last night or yesterday singing.
We were.
You know, when we've spoken before, creating space for more, you know, you've been a scientist, you've been an entrepreneur, but for you, different phases of your life, different things. And it's felt, when we've talked before, that art, music, culture is a sort of important part, and I'm guessing it has been along the way. But can you say more about where you are now in terms of kind of opening up opportunities for doing things that you haven't had the time to do before?
So two things really. There will come a time where I'm no longer handling the integration at InSites Consulting, and I will decide at some point that it's time to move on. I've always believed there will be another thing beyond where I am today. And as I've been led by my interests through my whole career, the thing that has been absorbing me most in the last 18 months in my spare time has been working with the chorus and working as a trustee to the chorus, and the love of kind of symphonic choral music. So I hope to open up more time to do that, which initially will be about, I hope, ensuring the future of that chorus, and bringing in the necessary funding, and just promoting a future of a really, really brilliant and passionate art form, which I adore. That will be one part of what I want to do. The other thing is, and that really is a return. That's because when I was a kid way back when, a lot of my spare time was spent playing the piano. So music was a huge part of my life, as a sort of practitioner, if you like. And then I just let it go for the last 25 years. So the return to that has been extraordinary, actually, has been an utter revelation. And I'm getting so much pleasure from that. The other part of my life, which will form part of the future, and I don't know the shape of that yet, but I'll keep my eyes open and I'll see it at some point, is working on designing regenerative cultures. Is just hugely important to me, and something that we've been doing a lot of work on in Space Doctors, thinking about how we need to be, how we need to behave, how we need to be to each other in order to support the transition at a human and societal level. So that will definitely be part of the future for me in some way, and I'm hoping music and the arts will be part of that. I think the arts have an enormous role to play in helping us make the biggest transition in human history. So I would like to be part of that in some way. So I don't know how that's all going to shape up, but that's definitely the next act beyond being part of InSites Consulting.
That's amazing. I love that sort of intersection of science, semiotics, arts. I think it's, and not that many people, leaders you come across, have that kind of true breadth of interest. So it's fascinating. I'm just going to give everybody a cue to put lots of questions into the chat, because we're coming up to question time. So do please put questions in for Fee in the chat. But I just wanted to also go back to the sense about women and gender, and you were talking earlier around the Women in Science network, and how, from that vantage point of kind of the early 90s through to now, especially the last couple of years, we've all been navigating rightly and positively, different issues around equality, diversity and inclusion. And I just wonder where you are at as a leader in terms of your understanding of that whole agenda, but also your own part to play in that. How has the Fee from the 1990s changed with that regard to where you're at now?
I'm heartened enormously by the way in which the role of women just in the working community has been, supported much more. I mean, progressively more and more over those years. If we all had a bottle of wine together, I could tell you some terrible stories of the 1990s and how it was in some of the big corporates, and indeed in research world. So I'm heartened by how that's changed dramatically. And I tell stories to my daughter sometimes, who's 20, and she'll say, yeah, but Mum, it's just not like that now. You can get over it. So I'm heartened by some of that. However, I'm also very aware that in InSites Consulting, for example, if we look at the managing partner board, we are very dominantly male. And if you look down lower in the organization, we're very dominantly female. So undoubtedly, there is still work to be done. We have to work on a meritocracy. I've always believed that if you prove yourself as a woman, and you are good at what you do and you deliver what you need to deliver, I've always believed that you will progress through. It's a super tough environment for some younger women. I'd be very happy, and I mentor some of my younger guys to try and help them through. It can be super tough, but I just think don't identify as female. Don't bring any of those sort of real sensibilities. Just be who you are. Be whatever that is. I've made sure that in my business, we've got a menopause policy, we've got a breastfeeding policy, we've got all the policies that are needed. I let my senior male managers be very clear about what they need to do in those situations with younger people who are going through those things, to deal with the physical changes that women have to deal with. But, be good at what you do. Stand firmly for your ability, stand firmly for what you're capable of. And then we hope we can move things along and things will keep progressing in the way they are. But it's a very, very different world today than it was 30 years ago.
It
very
is.
different.
So a couple of questions then for you. So somebody messaged to say, if you were now asked whether to do by somebody else, whether they should do a PhD or an MBA, what would you recommend based on your experiences?
Why do you have to choose? Or do neither? I mean, don't set yourself up with these oppositions. I think that, you know, the first thing I ever did in my career was sort of not make a decision about where I'm going to end up. You know, I think it's quite important to just keep doors open and to know that there may be 3 or 4 acts in your career. So keep them open. Do the thing that you're most passionate about now and keep a door open to doing the next one down the line. If that's what you feel like you want to do. I mean, this guy said to me, do both. I did my PhD. If I'd come out of that and said, actually, science is completely for me and this is where I want to go, I wouldn't have done my MBA. Mm-hmm. But just stay open to the next possibility. Life's about learning. It's a fantastic journey of possibility. I know, relatively little about designing regenerative culture and music. I know a bit. I know enough. But that's my next learning. That's my next to go. So yeah, don't box yourself into a corner.
So on that very issue then, so Rachel, one of our colleagues, who says, hello, fellow musician and choral society trustee here.
Hello, Rachel.
She's waving at you. She says, you mentioned the need for a nurturing and developmental environment. Can you offer some insights on what that looks like for you?
Yeah, well, I think, gosh, difficult one. In Space Doctors, it's just about, either taking the time or having the processes to know where people's spikes are, to know what people over-index on, what they love, what fulfills them in their life, and then finding ways to support that in their role. So if you make a resourcing decision on a project, make it a developmental decision. I just think in my business as well, don't make it really important that people are present. Don't make it really important that people have to work in a particular way. You know, allow people to find their way. Allow people on your team to find their way into the way of working that is most them. You know, we've never lost a day by not tracking time or by not tracking presenteeism or spending time wanting to make sure on the timesheets. We've never lost a day of productivity that way. We've only gained in productivity. Allow people to find their way, but make sure they know what it is you're all trying to do together, and that the values of the organization are values that they can kind of subscribe to, that you've got a purpose that feels healthy and feels interesting and gets them out of bed in the morning. But I think too much process, too much bureaucracy, too much forcing people into ways of working that don't help, it isn't good. You know, a nurturing and developmental environment is about excitement. It's about support. It's about being in it together. It's about helping people through when they have tough times. And I've always seen Space Doctors as, you know, if somebody needs to go on compassionate leave for 3 weeks, we'll give them 3 weeks compassionate leave and we'll pay them full salary. And the reason we do it is because somewhere down the line, somebody else will need to go and they will work whilst somebody else goes. Yeah. So that mutual accountability and mutual support, it's a network thing, development and nurture. It's about looking after each other.
And are you, coming out of lockdown, are you optimistic that other business leaders feel the same, or pessimistic that there's a pull back to the old ways of doing things?
We could ignore Boris in all this, Mr. Johnson. I am optimistic that there are more people who have now had the opportunity to undergo the experiment around more flexible working and more nurturing ways of working. You know, you might well be more productive in your pajamas and your socks than you will be, you know, on a tube train in London and trying to get into work. So more people have had that experiment. More people have seen how that works. That fills me with some optimism. The current government's position doesn't fill me with much optimism. we've definitely proved that we can work very creatively remotely, and we definitely proved that we can be more productive. What worries me, and it's the same for sustainability actually, as well as sort of more equitable ways of working and remote ways of working, is that, you know, the next big thing, of course, is the cost of living crisis that we're all having to deal with right now. What worries me is whether we can balance the advantages and the learnings that we've had through COVID with the push around cost of living, because I think that will bring down the control mechanisms again and bring down the drive to productivity, and not actually allow the space for organizations to thrive. So that, yeah, that worries me, obviously. And certainly in market research, you know, we do a lot of work on sustainability, on regeneration, and just recently we've seen the briefs that we get start to shift and start to change, and we get them from blue chips around the world. We work with Microsoft in Seattle, we work with Procter & Gamble, we work with Nestle, we work with, you know, all sorts of big organizations around the world, and the briefs are starting to shift slightly away from those sustainability focuses into how do we deal with inflation, how do we deal with cost of living rises. And if we're not careful, the attention gets shifted by the next most urgent physical or economic set of conditions. So yeah, that worries me a little, but we just need to keep focus.
Yeah. So a question from Becky, who says, how has your work in InSites from semiotics affected the way that you've approached the integration of space doctors with InSites Consulting, for example, around values and culture?
How has my work in semiotics affected the way I've approached the integration of space doctors and InSites Consulting? So it's a good question. It's a very good question. Thank you, Becky. I think we have always worked as one global team, very internationally, doing cultural research. And some of the work in InSites Consulting is more country focused and less culturally aware. So it's very consumer focused, but less culturally aware. So we have been trying hard to bring cultural understanding to that consumer work, because we see it as the context is the primary lens for all we're doing. I think I am very keen on localization and not globalization. So really understanding market research, you know, methodologies and processes at a local level rather than necessarily at a global level, because I think that's where a lot of our key organizations will be focusing their attention. So that means, again, getting very connected into the local cultural context. Clearly, we have another semiotic thought is the way in which we communicate. So space doctors will communicate differently to InSites Consulting. Every organization has its own language, has its own way of constructing meaning and dealing with the key themes of work. And those are the language constructs that you only notice for sort of 3 weeks when you first join a business, and then you adopt them, and then you never notice them again. And so we have this sort of blissful period of time where we can see how InSites frame ideas and how we frame ideas, and sort of using our semiotic understanding to try and call those out and bring them to the fore, so that we really do have a lingua franca that we can communicate through, because without that, integration is quite a tough thing. So culture and language are the two ways in which InSites, semiotics has formed that.
It is a great question though, about how do you use that professional insight to shape the kind of culture of the organization going forward. Yeah, it's fascinating. So a couple of questions from Mohit, who's joining the MBA in September, and who is aiming to work as a sustainability consultant after that. So he says, any insights that you'd like to share with me when I get on this journey? 31, and while I feel very confident and grounded in my purpose, I still feel nervous with the long journey ahead.
Yeah.
So perhaps that question first, and then we'll move on to the other question.
It's so difficult, Mohit. I could talk to you for a long time. There's lots of things to share with you, and super exciting that you have that kind of plan. Stay light on your toes with the plan. The plan is just something that's sketched out into the future. Stay light on your toes with it, because you might sort of realize somewhere down the line, halfway through your MBA, for example, that your thought about sustainable agriculture and responsible tourism morphs into something different. And that could be better. So have your plan and be confident in it, but stay light on your toes a little bit, because things may shape and things may change. Keep your eyes open for that, because doors will open as you go through. So sort of stay light on your toes. It's good to be able to articulate that you feel nervous about that journey. That's really good to say, I do feel really nervous about that. If you can turn that nervousness into excitement, if you can turn that nervousness into energy, if you can channel that in some way, that will help you a lot. But nervousness is good. That's fine. That's fine.
So the second question was, I come from India and I'm looking to work in different continents and geographies. Any insights you'd like to share from your journey of expanding your business to 6 continents, multiple offices and new markets? Another great question.
Yes, loads. Gosh, insights on sharing your journey, expanding businesses to 6 continents. Don't underestimate cultural difference. You won't. You're coming from India to Exeter. You know, you won't underestimate. But cultural difference is enormous in terms of, you know, client needs, in terms of benefits of what you do and how those are received. It's enormous in terms of the ways in which things need to be articulated, how your proposition will need to show up in those markets. Don't underestimate that, and also don't underestimate how you can share learnings. So what we found when we opened the Singapore office was suddenly we had a whole different lens on our business, and actually a whole load of learning that could improve our business in Europe as well. So great learnings, but don't underestimate the cultural difference. It takes longer than you think sometimes to make that work, and to make that work sort of effectively. And make sure you're scaling the right things. So make sure you're scaling, you know, capability. Make sure you're scaling skills and understanding. You know, Singapore was our first office that we opened, and when we moved out to Singapore, we just wanted to scale our offer. We just wanted to scale, you know, this is what we do here and this is what works, so this is what you're going to do there and that's what's going to work there. And it's just clearly not the case. It was a market at a different stage of development. It was culturally just constructed in a different way. So what we ended up scaling was our capabilities, and the capabilities shaped a different sort of offer in Singapore, which we then learned from. So just be clear about what you're scaling, I think. Good luck.
So just while we wait for any final questions, I'm going to ask you my final question, which is the dinner party question. So those people that have watched this before know I always ask this question. So you're allowed whoever you like, alive or dead, at your fantasy dinner party. Fee, tell us who's at your imaginary dinner party and why.
Well, I think I'd have to have Bob there, the dog, because he's my best mate. So he'd be at the head of the table. I'd quite like to have my grandchildren and great-grandchildren there, because I'd like to understand who they are as people, as representatives of 2050 or 2060, you know, onwards. I'd like to understand what we achieved, what we were able to change, what conviction we showed. I'd like to understand what kind of social and planetary engineering we actually put in place. And I'd love to understand what role the arts played in that, creativity played in that. So I'd love to chat to my great-grandchildren. I'd really like to introduce them to David Bowie, because he is obviously my hero. I'd like to ask him why everything went wrong when he died. and I'd like to introduce my grandchildren to him. And then I'd like to have there some scientists and some social theorists and some artists. And I'd like them to tell me how things have changed in the sciences and in the arts. I'd like them to tell me about, you know, what happened with fusion? Did we get there? You know, what happened with diseases of cognition and diseases of the mind and the mental health crisis? Did we find a way? did we solve that? So I think a lot of my dinner table will be Bob and I doing some future gazing.
So fascinating to look forward rather than back, and I suppose in your nature to do that. Andrew Miller, who was our last speaker, he brought to his dinner party himself when he was about 20, which I thought was an interesting idea. But
really
you're bringing future generations to your dinner party. That's lovely.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Brilliant. Well, I think that we're running out of time. Fiona, thank you so much for being so open, inspiring.
Pleasure.
Really thoughtful and impressive, actually. So thank you so much for sharing so honestly all of that stuff. I think what you've left me with is that sort of sense of that sort of spanning boundaries that you do, that ability to sort of translate across different environments and contexts, but also the kind of bravery and courage of being a leader that just kind of gets on with it and gets stuff done. And that's really terrific to hear. So thank you so much for making the time today.
Great pleasure.
This is the last of our series of Leading Edge Fireside Chats. We'll be back in the autumn with our new series of Leading Edge, where we bring speakers to talk about the big issues to do with society and business. And we're Jackie and I are planning that at the moment. So if people have got ideas on great speakers you'd love to hear from on Leading Edge, we're going to be moving into a hybrid environment with Leading Edge in the autumn. So do please drop me an email, drop Jackie an email. We'd love to hear your ideas. But thanks again, Fee, for joining us. Thanks to everybody for coming over your lunch times, and hope to see you all again in the autumn.
Thanks, everyone.